Hey, everybody, this is Movies Are Spiritual. We are talking about the Force in the Star Wars trilogies. And we were watching the prequels recently, and we saw a lot of talk about Anakin being the prophesied one to bring balance to the Force. And we wondered what that meant. Drew, when we talked about that on the podcast for those episodes, what is it that was tripping us up that we were trying to understand about the Force?
Well, they keep saying you got to bring balance, and my understanding of balance is equal parts.
Like a yin yang?
Yeah, if you're going to have a balance in the Force, you have to equal parts light, equal part dark. That's balance. So if you remove all the Sith and it's just Jedi and light side Force users, that's not really balanced. The scales are like this, right? So if Anakin is bringing balance to the Force, I guess he would have just had to have lived as a Jedi, but still had some dark in him. That's the only thing I can think of. And maybe that's what happened at the end of Jedi when Luke's the last one. He did kind of go close to the dark side. So maybe that's balance. I mean, that's it. I mean, they never really explained it. They said he's going to bring balance to the Force. How? They never explain it.
Maybe we're looking at this wrong. Maybe the prophecy is right, but we're trying to find a positive endpoint where if you really, really look at it, he did his best. And I guess Ahsoka lived, so he didn't quite bring balance. But I mean, if you really look at the original trilogy, he killed Obi-Wan, and there was one Jedi and one Sith left.
There's two Sith. You had the Emperor, too. Oh, but there was also Yoda.
And Ahsoka now. So now we got 2 and 3, but Yoda ended up dying. So he did ultimately bring balance to the Force. But we're trying to think of this prophecy as being a positive, bringing positive balance to the Force. And maybe the prophecy was written to show the Jedi, hey, you know what? You're getting too powerful. You're getting too arrogant. So now we're going to bring the midichlorians have come together to bring this one person to bring balance. And the way he's going to bring balance is he's going to go bad and he's going to kill y'all. He did bring balance. He brought thousands of Jedis down to a small handful with him and the Emperor left. So yeah, I mean, technically, if you go with the original trilogy, he did bring balance to the Force because he knocked it down to 2 and 2.
Yeah. He destroyed the Emperor, who basically was trying to take over the galaxy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have a theory that I think will help solve the puzzle of what balancing the Force means. I was recently listening to a podcast, so I'm the theology nerd on this podcast. I was listening to Naked Bible podcast talk about ancient Egyptian religion and what they believed. And we know that George Lucas was experimenting with his writing to explore different religious ideas, right? In the original trilogy, you've got a lot of Eastern Buddhist ideas inspired by samurai practices, things like that. And then in the prequel trilogy, you've got some exploration of prophecy and a chosen one, a Messiah type figure. We talk about this is wild, but Anakin had a virgin birth in Phantom Menace. So he started to mix in ideas from Judaism, Christianity. I mean, it's all there in this melting pot. But I think I figured out where balancing the Force comes from. Does anybody know?
Hit me with it, man.
We know he was pulling from ancient Eastern religions, right? Well, one of those would have been the Egyptians, and they had this concept of chaos and order. It's called Maat. It's like M-A-A-T. And basically, their king, the Pharaoh, had this divine responsibility to balance the forces of chaos and order. But bringing balance didn't mean balancing them like yin-yang, like 50-50. It meant when something chaotic happened, he was supposed to hold the forces of chaos in check or return things from being chaotic and imbalanced and return them to order, right? That was his job. So he was basically a Jedi. Like the Egyptian pharaoh would resemble the Jedi. Because the Jedi have the responsibility to balance the Force, and the Sith are like the chaos that interrupts it.
So if things got too good, he would let chaos come up a little bit to balance it back out?
No, he was always supposed to hold chaos in
He just
check.
holds it in check.
They call it balancing. Yeah, it's weird because when we say balancing, we think, oh, 50-50, equal parts.
Yeah.
But that's not what they thought when they thought of balancing the forces of chaos and order. It really meant bringing chaos back under control so there was order again. That was like Pharaoh's responsibility, and he was viewed as both the son of Ra, the sun god, and also the literal human incarnation of Ra. And if he could not hold the forces of chaos in check, then people started to freak out. They're like, "Oh no, what's going on? Ra's being defeated." So that's why it was such a big deal in the Moses story when Moses comes in there and starts causing all these plagues in Egypt and turning the Nile into blood and making the sun disappear, because the sun, they thought that was Ra. And so if Ra doesn't show up for work one day, they're like, what happened? Did he die? Is he in prison somewhere? But the gist is, I think that whole thing is where Lucas may have gotten, he either got that idea from that type of Eastern thinking, or maybe that some of these other nearby Eastern religions have a similar concept. But I couldn't believe it. We podcasted on Revenge of the Sith. We all hung up from the call, and then I started listening to that podcast, and like immediately that's what they were talking about. And we've been stumped. Like, what does balancing the Force mean? It doesn't make sense. And I think that Eastern idea is what they were going for.
That's really interesting, because if that's the case, then at the end of Jedi, Vader did bring balance because he got the chaos under control by defeating the Emperor, and now it's left with Luke. So yeah, that's interesting. That's going to be the way I explain it from now on.
So now we need Vader to come back to stop J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson.
Yes, because they are Ruin Johnson, as I like to call him.
That is hilarious.
Are we saying his name right?
It's Ruin Johnson.
Okay, that works.
So to sum that up, it's not the number of Jedi and Sith, right? It's whether or not chaos is in the galaxy, is running rampant or not, or if the forces of chaos have been contained. That is balance to the Force then, if it truly comes from this Eastern way of thinking.
I like that. I really do. I like
Makes
that.
Sense.
I think that's a really good way of, if somebody says what's balancing the Force, that might be the way to go.
That would have been a 30-second scene they could have put in one of the prequels, and we wouldn't have spent 2 hours talking about it.
All you got to do is watch some Moses film. Yeah. No, they never explain that in those movies either about Moses. But that is the idea. Like, everyone in Egypt is freaking out because their pharaoh is failing at his job. He's not being a good Jedi.
Right on.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with that theory from now on.
I like it.
Listeners, if you enjoyed this discussion, we just covered the Star Wars prequels on our podcast and Rogue One, and we analyzed them for spiritual themes and content. So check those out, and we will be back for another episode soon.